Friends, hello. Today, July 25th, Friday morning live broadcast. Political technologist Mikhail Scheitelman is back. Mikhail, hello. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Hello, Igor. Likewise. Mikhailo, I will start this conversation in an unconventional way, with domestic politics, because this is the most topical issue at the moment. Bill number 2413, which was first actively covered in the media. The committee passed, the vote passed, Ruslan Stefanchuk's signature passed, Volodymyr Zelensky's signature passed, the document was made public and approved. There was a public outcry. In the United States, Republican and Democratic congressmen criticized. The European Union and audit firms called for a repeal. Yesterday, a new bill from the President of Ukraine appeared. This is not a repeal, but a course correction, a decision by the authorities to avoid defeat by introducing a new document with clarifications. The official position was that a Russian spy had been identified in the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, NABU. The NABU has access to military and state secrets. Its officers can request documents on military purchases directly from the Defense Ministry. In peacetime, this is regarded as a fight against corruption. In wartime, having a Russian spy means leaking information directly to Russia. All secret documents, military data, and details of cooperation with the United States, Germany, and other countries become available to the enemy. This is unacceptable. In conditions of war, military censorship is applied, which restricts freedom of speech. This practice is legal and is applied in many countries during hostilities. Therefore, the authorities and MPs are making attempts to limit Russian influence in the NABU. A temptation arose for the authorities. Under the pretext of limiting Russian influence related to espionage, steps were taken that ended up being excessive. Instead of solely protecting against espionage, the measures were also used for political purposes. Kakit Kellogg's daughter, an American supporter of the magicians and Donald Trump, published a post on social media outlining her position on the situation in 5 points. Her first point was that in times of war, there is an inevitable tension between security and democracy. She went on to argue that it is important not to cross the line in the quest for security. There is a civil society that responds to such challenges. The author supports the protests, regretting that their initiators have not publicly identified themselves. The opposing scandal was that the deputies took advantage of the situation and included provisions in the law that infringed on anti-corruption activities. The protesters, mostly young people, came sincerely and honestly, but the organizers of the action were the opposition, namely organized political forces. The exact names of the parties are unknown. By the way, sorry Michael, subscribe. There will be a link to your YouTube channel in the description. Thank you, subscribe to your YouTube channel. If you want, yesterday the second half of the video was devoted to this topic. I'm naming everyone I can link to it. I don't have 100% proof, but as a political technologist I analyze who came out with what words and headlines, who is whose, who is how, who is related to whom, and you can see right away. Please note, I am not mentioning or referring to Petro Poroshenko's party, although some people think that my words refer to it. Some people organized a protest, then young people, including self-organized youth, joined them. A situation arose in which the actions of both sides raised questions. Some allowed violations, others conducted the protest not quite transparently. Nevertheless, the result is positive. Society has become more active. A new law is expected to be adopted, which will be under the control of the West. The European Union's ambassador to Ukraine, Katerina Matonova, said that she supported the new law. The National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine also expressed its approval. The situation is moving towards civil peace and harmonization of the interests of all parties. This was possible thanks to the activity of the protesters, as well as the support of the European Union and the United States of America. They are expected to check the content of the law and express their position. Taking into account the financial dependence of the state on the USA and the EU, the law will be harmonized with their requirements. From the beginning, there was no doubt that the process would be settled within a few weeks. Thanks to Western pressure and civil society activism, the process of resolving the situation continues. Democracy presupposes the existence of power and opposition in balance, where different forces seek to control certain bodies. This is a normal element of the political system. To understand the wartime practice, the example of Israel is given, where armed conflicts occur regularly. Israel has an intelligence service, the Mossad, which keeps major state and military secrets. The head of the Mossad is obliged to disclose this information only to two officials, the president and the prime minister of the country. The head of Mossad reports to the prime minister and the opposition leader every 2 weeks, ensuring democratic oversight. The opposition likely fulfilled its role here. However, the rally organizers, including the Golos party, did not mention their involvement on the posters, which would have improved transparency. Mikhail, in conclusion to the topic, I would like to ask you a question. There are different points of view. I strive to remain objective. Some people believe that it was an attempt to usurp power, which was stopped by society. NABU and SAP are far from perfect. They had cases hanging for years, which should have been finalized long ago. But summing up, don't you think that despite everything, the situation developed in the most civilized and correct way possible within the framework of democracy? The situation corresponds to the level of development of a young democracy, which is Ukraine. In countries with more mature democratic institutions, such as Denmark, such processes are stopped at an early stage through a variety of control mechanisms. In Israel, the situation is similar with the reform of the judiciary and the Supreme Court of Justice. Protests in Israel have been going on for several years, and society has not yet reached a unified solution, despite the similar nature of the conflict. One party had a majority in parliament and made a decision that sparked mass protests. In the US, Donald Trump is attempting to gain control of certain bodies, including the Federal Reserve, which has been the subject of an ongoing scandal. He is also seeking to gain influence over the judiciary. These actions take place within the framework of democratic procedures, and so far they do not go beyond the law and do not become a crime. Civil society was active, disagreeing with the decision despite the parliamentary majority. This is an example of social control. Many young people who were not previously interested in politics took part in the protest. The average age of participants was around 20 years old. Parents reported that their children came to the action. Mikhail, that's what I'm talking about. When there was the case of Nikolai Zlochevsky, no one came out. Here you can see very clearly black and white, pro and con. It's easy to pick a side. But when it comes to the internal process, which requires deeper analysis, almost no one deals with it. One concerned parent wrote that he was immediately outraged by the NABU bill. This is an adult, presumably the same age as the author. However, his son stated that he was going to take part in the protest. The parent questioned how he got such awareness because he knows that his son had previously shown no interest in politics and did not even know what NABU was. Many of the protesters, including 18-year-olds, had previously spent time playing computer games and TikTok. They were informed about the situation through these channels. Some parents sent photos of their children going to the rally with placards signed with their gaming nicknames. Protests are useful, but it is important that they are transparent, as in more mature democracies. In Germany, protest participants are clearly identified. Posters show whether they represent the Green Party, CDU, or another group. Everything is transparent. Parties have youth branches with members from age 18, often students. So parents know their child is protesting as part of the CDU youth wing, not due to an anonymous call from a virtual game character. Adolescents' participation in political processes should take place openly, with an understanding of who is responsible for them and what views they represent. This is important for transparency to avoid manipulation and interference from outside. There is a risk that today participation is initiated for good, but tomorrow it can be used for harm, for example through the influence of the Russian Federation, its speakers on platforms like Twitch and in computer games. This is why we need public control and transparency, for which the people took to the streets. For transparency and accountability, it is important that those who organized or helped organize the protests are also clearly identified. Saying no one organized it, people came out on their own, overlooks that organization doesn't require money. Events like Kyiv Day happen voluntarily, but someone still arranges the logistics. Therefore, we must be attentive to both the authorities and protest organizers. Openness means saying, we are so-and-so, and we organize these protests. Mr. Michael, Istanbul track, meeting on June 23rd. They talked for less than a year. The only real novelty is the Russian delegation's proposal for an online meeting in 3 formats: humanitarian, political, and military. All the rest is incomprehensible for whom. The White House and Donald Trump no longer talk about the necessity of meetings and negotiations. Only Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan calls to discuss a ceasefire, supported by the US State Department. Further steps depend on the Kremlin. Subsequent meetings and talks yielded no results. Russia revealed plans to organize online negotiations of 3 working groups, which was actually the end of the peace process in 2022. Then everything went online, but the process was soon forgotten. This was the end of the process. The Russian side tried to demonstrate that work was being done, referring to the activities of the working groups, to which it was necessary to report to the leadership. Vladimir Medinsky said, "We very much hope that the 4th round of negotiations will also take place. Taking into account that Russia refused offers in the previous 3 rounds, the question arises, why is there a need for a 4th round?" The statement is perceived as an attempt to use the talks to travel to Istanbul, rather than to actually resolve the conflict.
Стрёмная, да, история, типа, зачем вам четвертый раунд, если вы на 3 раундах от всего отказались?
All proposals were rejected. The initiative for a ceasefire, including in certain areas for the evacuation of the wounded by sanitary services, was also rejected. High-level talks were rejected. Dmitry Peskov said that you cannot put the cart before the horse, and that it was necessary to first agree on a peaceful settlement and then hold meetings. Obviously, Vladimir Putin will not meet Vladimir Zelenskyy, as the author claims, ever. The only possible situation is if Putin ends up in prison in The Hague, then Zelenskyy may visit him in his cell, similar to the way Pope John Paul II visited Ali Agca, the terrorist from the Grey Wolves organization who shot at him, in prison. This is documented by a historic photograph. Both sides named few points. Theoretically, Vladimir Zelenskyy can only meet Vladimir Putin if he is arrested, convicted, or executed, but not in a political context, not as the current president of the Russian Federation. It was recognized that the positions of the parties are opposite. Memoranda were discussed, but this did not lead to concrete results. The online format of negotiations is dangerous because it can create the illusion of real dialogue. This is worrisome because such an imitation could mislead the public. The American side, including Kit Kellogg, is closely monitoring what is happening. Every word spoken is recorded, regardless of who said it, Ukrainians or Russians. Donald Trump also does not take this format as serious and does not allow the possibility of being misled by a staged process. This theater in 3 acts was organized personally by Vladimir Putin, not by the Ukrainian side. The talks in Istanbul were initiated by Putin on May 9th, after he was given an ultimatum on sanctions. Ukraine has sent delegations to the meetings 3 times, but no concrete proposals have come from Russia. Today there are 39 days left before Donald Trump's ultimatum expires, and the third round of talks served in part as a reminder to Trump to act, whether to impose sanctions or other measures in 30 or 9 days. And also about 50 days, now it's 39. Mr. McHale, can we consider it a consequence of the Kremlin's tough stance that within the last 2 or 3 days the U.S. State Department announced 2 aid packages to Ukraine, $332 million and $330 million. These are not billion-dollar sums, but still, is it safe to assume that, as you noted earlier, Donald Trump is not naive, talks a lot, but the process continues? The supply of arms from Europe represents assistance, while from the United States it is a sale of goods. Financing is provided by European funds. Either they are provided to Ukraine, or Europe pays for the goods directly to the American side. Earlier, before the current events, there were already 2 similar packages, one for about $100 million, the other for about $300 million, presumably in April. There were urgent problems related to arms supply. F-16 fighter jets had been provided with the relevant components. 2 new military aid packages were recently announced, one yesterday and one today. This confirms Donald Trump's statement 11 days ago, last Monday, as part of his address on the situation with Russia. He mentioned the intention to provide weapons to Ukraine, mentioning a period of 50 days. The 50-day period was announced quickly, but next, Donald Trump spoke at length about weapons, including the Patriot system and missiles. These supplies are included in the respective aid packages. Official announcements only happen on items that are required to be disclosed by law. If it is a direct sale from a manufacturer, such as the factory that produces the Patriot systems, it is not required to be publicly disclosed, because it is not formalized through a decree format like other types of aid. When weapons are transferred from warehouses after purchase, official statements are made. The public sees only a small visible part, while larger deals like Germany quietly buying 1,000 missiles from Lockheed Martin remain hidden. U.S. Permanent Representative to NATO Julianne Smith was quoted as saying that Russia is a proxy for China, and China is using it to wage war. This can be seen as a fundamental and clear position, since earlier it was only about China's unlikely participation in aiding Russia. In the context of this topic, it is worth mentioning the meeting between Charles Michel and Ursula von der Leyen in Peking with Xi Jinping. The Chinese side shortened the visit to one day, suggesting either reluctance to continue the dialogue or a lack of topics. Ursula von der Leyen noted that the situation is critical and requires a decision, as the trade imbalance with China reaches $306 billion. China and Russia are linked by different histories, although they are united by a common frame. China has officially stated that it is not satisfied with Russia's defeat and opposes such an outcome. At the same time, Beijing did not make statements about military assistance or arms supplies, but only expressed concern about the situation. China began expressing its position from the Munich conference in February this year, saying that Russia is an important supplier for it, and it is impossible to abandon it before September 8th. Beijing will not allow Donald Trump to cut Russia off from China, as it threatens northern supply lines and strategic cover. China has outlined its interest to the United States and the European Union. Europe, through Ursula von der Leyen, said a month ago that it would not allow a situation in which a free trade agreement with China would be concluded if Beijing supports Russia in military actions. The position was clearly stated. It is necessary to choose between supporting Russia and signing a trade agreement with the European Union, which implies mutual reduction of tariffs and favorable economic conditions. The U.S. statement echoes Europe's position. If China wants to discuss a trade agreement, it must realize that ending support for Russia will be one of the conditions. There are 39 days left of the announced 50, and while many believe that Vladimir Putin needs this period, the United States actually needs it because it is the time when key technical and fundamental issues related to international pressure and sanctions policy are resolved. The next 39 days are crucial for the White House and U.S. Treasury to persuade China to reduce or stop buying Russian oil. Donald Trump isn't pushing for 100% duties on Chinese goods, since those are already in place and met with retaliations. His goal is to pressure India, Brazil, China, and the EU to halt Russian oil imports, including Turkey's role in the BSP. Turkey is likely not a major consumer of Russian oil. It may re-export part of the supplies, but even full reliance on Russian oil would have little impact on Russia's total exports. India, with 1.5 billion people, accounts for over a third of Russian oil imports, making it a key market. Turkey's needs are limited despite its developed industry and access to domestic, Syrian, and Iraqi oil. The exact share of Russian oil in its consumption is unknown.
Я понимаю, что Турция гораздо более богатая страна, там больше индустрии, но все равно получается. И потом у Турции есть своя нефть, сирийская нефть, иракская там рядом, все под боком, то есть им не так уж прямо это нужно.
Mikhail, I asked again because I didn't see the exact figures. According to some Western experts, the largest buyers of Russian oil are China, India, and Turkey. The percentage ratio is unknown. Was it a surprise to you or a signal to the United States that the Indian oil minister said that he might refuse to buy Russian oil? India has long voiced similar statements, especially after the imposition of sanctions against the Russian shadow fleet last year. At that time, they discussed the issues of oil suppliers and possible alternatives in case of a cutoff of supplies from Russia. The current position of India's oil minister is, in the author's opinion, the result of ongoing negotiations.
уже были однажды. Но сейчас это заявление министра нефти, оно и есть результат переговоров, я уверен.
Negotiations on tariffs continue between the US and India. A public statement was made by India at the request of the American side. Delhi expressed its readiness to accept possible tariffs. This was a kind of response to the statement of Dmitry Peskov or Sergei Lavrov, made a day earlier, that Russia is used to sanctions and is confident that its partners will also withstand pressure. India in turn said, "We are not going to withstand." India responded to the threat of sanctions by refusing to buy, preferring alternative suppliers. The European Union stepped up the pressure by imposing sanctions on a Rosneft subsidiary, refining Russian crude in India. This coincided with the timing and reinforced the diplomatic message. In the remaining 39 days, China and the European Union must be negotiated, and as it looks now, it is the European Union that will be the most difficult to reach an agreement with.
Евросоюзом, что очень сложно, кстати. Вот по коже выглядит сейчас, что самым сложным будет договориться с Евросоюзом.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen last week called on European Union countries to impose 100% tariffs against China, India, and Brazil, similar to those already applied by the United States. She emphasized that joint sanctions against Russia require further coordination. If some states impose tariffs while others continue to receive goods at lower prices, it violates the principles of fairness and weakens the overall effect of pressure. Negotiations are currently underway, but it will be difficult to reach agreement with the European Union. Strategically, within the European Union-China-US triangle, Ursula von der Leyen's trip was the latest attempt to avoid a trade agreement with the United States. On August 1st, Donald Trump's executive order imposing 30% duties against the European Union goes into effect. The figures have been changing, but the latest rate announced is 30%.
Вроде как 30% последний раз назывались пошлины. 30% пошлины Соединенных Штатов Америки против Евросоюза.
30% duties start August 1st if the EU doesn't sign a trade or investment deal with the US. Trump said tariffs could be reduced for those who do sign. In response, Europe is exploring a free trade agreement with China as an alternative, like Australia already has.
Европа попыталась последний раз создать китайскую альтернативу. То есть, а если мы не подпишем со Штатами, но подпишем с китайцами? И тогда у нас будет свободная зона торговли с Китаем и не будет с США. Это же возможная история? Возможно. Вот у Австралии есть зона свободной торговли с Китаем.
Australia has a zero tax rate within the framework of a free trade zone with China, which is based on mutual economic interests. Australia has large reserves of bauxite, iron, and other ores, which the Chinese side actively buys and processes. Europe has different interests, and the attempt to build a similar format with China was unsuccessful. According to Western media reports, the outcome of the meetings was briefly covered without matching their significance, indicating the absence of concrete agreements. Iran resumes contacts with the IAEA. The issue of Palestine again came to the forefront after French President Emmanuel Macron's statement that he was ready to recognize a Palestinian state. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu criticized the statement. U.S. Senator Marco Rubio also disagreed with France's position. Israeli spokesman Witkoff said that agreements between Israel and Hamas were close, but now both the U.S. and Israel are pulling out of the talks because of unacceptable actions by Hamas.
Перед домовленості Хамас і Ізраїлю, але зараз виходять з цих всіх переговорів і Ізраїль, і США, тому що Хамас там неприпустимі речі робить.
Hamas governs the Gaza Strip located on the Mediterranean coast. Palestinian territory consists of two unconnected parts, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, a large tract of land near Jerusalem. In the past elections, Hamas won in the Gaza Strip, while the Palestine Liberation Organization won in the West Bank.
И разница в чем? На выборах, там когда-то были выборы, давно они были. Хамас победил в секторе Газа, а Организация освобождения Палестины победила на западном берегу реки Иордан.
The West Bank is controlled by Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, Yasser Arafat's successor, while Hamas rules the Gaza Strip. Emmanuel Macron's call to recognize Palestine refers to the territory under Abbas's control, not Gaza or Hamas, aiming to strengthen West Bank autonomy. Representative Witkoff's talks are with Hamas in Gaza, not the recognized part. Israel opposes recognizing Palestine in its current form. The Hamas attack on Israel was the beginning of the current conflict. It was not military in nature, but was an act of genocide against peaceful settlements, accompanied by brutal torture of local residents. Hamas militants recorded the events on video cameras, adding to the shock and public condemnation. The Israeli government has refused to publicly release video footage of the attacks, showing it only privately to ambassadors and journalists. About 1,700 people were killed in attacks on peaceful areas, 1,000 of them murdered, amounting to a massacre. Recognizing the state of Palestine now would be seen as a victory for Hamas, which used brutal attacks to gain international recognition. If these events had happened earlier in the 70-year political process, Palestine's recognition could be seen as natural. But now Hamas has won, and recognition follows terrorist pressure, seen as conceding to violence for political goals. This is why Senator Marco Rubio criticized Emmanuel Macron. The story of the truce with Hamas is different from other initiatives. Stephen Witkoff, who was tasked with stopping the war in the Gaza Strip, was once again involved in a process that failed to produce results. He has repeatedly been involved in negotiations without ever reaching concrete agreements. Donald Trump, despite this, publicly claimed at his inauguration that the conflict had already been stopped, attributing the success to Witkoff's efforts. The war continues despite Stephen Witkoff's claims of peace. He has repeatedly claimed that the conflict will end, but each time this has not been confirmed. He was tasked with negotiating on two fronts simultaneously, with Hamas in the Gaza Strip and with Iran. Both processes ended in failure, leading to an escalation of the conflict that killed hundreds of people on both sides. Shelling, strategic bombing, and fighting were the consequences of Stephen Witkoff's efforts. War broke out despite Stephen Witkoff's promises to negotiate with Iran. His claimed talks failed. Russia's Vladimir Putin took the initiative, escalating attacks and civilian bombings, seeing Witkoff's actions as a green light. Witkoff publicly calls Putin a friend, praises him, and supports handing 4 regions to Russia. This is also the result of Stephen Witkoff. It's unclear how much longer Donald Trump will tolerate him. Perhaps they have a special relationship. The only person who tried to remove Witkoff was Goose, who did it on the golf course. In the author's opinion, it is Goose who should remove Stephen Witkoff from the negotiating process. Mikhail, thank you for the meeting and for the opportunity to gain a deeper understanding of the situation in the world, particularly Russia's war against Ukraine. I remind viewers that today, July 25th, in the description of our conversation, there is a link to Mikhail Shetelman's YouTube channel, where you can find more information. Subscribe to YouTube 24. Leave comments. Your opinion is important. Feedback is also needed. My name is Igor Gavrishak.